Hi everybody, and welcome back to the Stamperia Magic Forest mini album tutorial for ScrapNCreate. If you have been following along the whole time, we have completed all 4 of our base pages and we're now ready to start putting together the actual album itself. So that's what this video is going to be about. I'm going to show you how to create the hinges, how to place those in the cover, and then how to put the pages in, and then we will begin decorating the cover. If you are new to the tutorial series, all of these papers from the Magic Forest collection are available on the ScrapNCreate website. They are linked in the description box below. For my album, I'm going to be using this cover here. It's a wooden cover with a flexible hinge. It's cut on a laser cutter. It's my design, and this is linked in the description box below to my Etsy shop. But if you don't want to purchase this cover to make your album, I'm going to show you how you can use cardstock and chipboard and create a similar album, but it won't have this curved piece here. It won't have that flexible piece, but the spine will actually have a curve to it. So if you want to use your own materials, you are going to need 2 pieces of 8.5 by 11 cardstock. But if you want to use my cover, you will need to purchase that on my Etsy shop. So I'm going to first show you how to make the album using my cover. And then at the end, I will show you how to make the album cover using chipboard, if that's what you would prefer. And in the description box, there will be a timestamp that will tell you what part of the video to go to if you want to bypass this part and if you just want to go to the cover for the chipboard. Regardless, the first part of the album is going to be the same, where we're going to create the hinge and the attachments to place the pages in the front covers. So you will want to watch that, and then you'll want to go to the timestamp after that. To make the hinge, we're going to need 1 piece of cardstock that measures 10.5 by 8.25. Now we're going to be scoring this for the hinges, and there's going to be some of this that's going to go onto the front cover and the back cover as well. So I'm going to score this at 2 inches, and then at 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5, 5.5. Don't mind me as I move my piece. It does not score right on mine at 5.5, so I have to move it over. I'll move it back though. So this was at 5.5, then at 6, 6.5, 7, 7.5, 8, and 8.5. Next, I'm going to fold on all of these score lines and burnish really well with my bone folder to get really crisp creases. Once I have mine folded in one direction, I like to go back and fold it in the opposite direction too. That way, whenever my pages are in my album, they actually fold a little bit easier because they're used to being folded in both directions. So I'm just going to go through one at a time, folding these backward and using my bone folder to create a nice crisp fold. On the back side of my hinges, on all these 1/2 inch sections, I've put numbers to make this easier to show you how to adhere these together to create the hinges. If you already know how to do this, you might not need this, but if you're new to making mini albums, this can be a really easy way to know which of these you're going to adhere together. So we're going to be adhering 2 of these together to create a hinge that's going to stick up, that the page is going to attach to. So you can use double-sided tape here if you want, or you can use wet adhesive. I prefer to use my tacky glue. But if you are using your double-sided tape, you need to cover the entire area to make sure that these don't come apart. We're going to skip number 1, and I'm going to put my adhesive all around the area for number 2 in this 1/2 inch section. And then I'm going to fold 2 onto 3. Then I'm going to use my bone folder to adhere these really well so they become one unit. Then I'm going to flip back. So now you'll see number 1 and number 4. We're going to skip number 4 and we're going to put adhesive on number 5. Once you have adhesive on 5, fold over to 6 and burnish. Then we're going to fold back. So now you'll see 1, 4, and 7. We're going to skip 7 and place adhesive on number 8. Then we're going to fold 8 over onto 9 and burnish. Then we're going to fold over. So now we have 10. We'll skip number 10 and put glue or adhesive on number 11. And then we'll fold 11 over onto 12. Then we'll fold this back, and now we have 13. So this is what the piece will look like from this side. Flipping over, I'm going to flip all of my hinges this direction and burnish. Then I'm going to flip each of them up. And this is what my pages are going to attach to. So this is what the front is going to look like, and this is what the back is going to look like. So we've got the back, and we've got the front. From this 12 by 12 that had the image of the castle, I cut a piece from the back side. It measures just under 2.5 inches by 8.25 inches. And it is going to go on the back side of these hinges. So it needs to be just slightly smaller. So that's why I say just under 2.5 inches. And you're gonna place it on here. And if you need to trim this at all, you go ahead and trim it, but you wanna make sure it's not sticking over. And we're going to adhere this directly to these pieces. So you can either place your adhesive on here, or you can place your adhesive on your backing piece. I'm going to place mine on my hinges. That way I know that all of these hinges are completely covered. Now that I have my adhesive, I'm just going to go and lay this piece right in the center, lining everything up. And then I'm going to burnish this down and get this to be as flat as possible. And now that I have it this way, I'm actually going to turn it over this direction. That way the flattest part is on the surface, and then I can start burnishing between my hinges to really make sure that that piece is adhered really well. This is going to strengthen the spine piece. Now, if you like to use Tyvek in your albums, you could use Tyvek here. It's going to strengthen that spine. You could have also used Tyvek for your hinges if you want to. I just tend to use cardstock, so whatever you prefer to do, you can if you choose. Now I'm going to go ahead and let this dry really well. Since I am using wet adhesive, I'm just going to leave this before I do anything else with it. From another piece of cardstock, I cut 2 pieces that measure 5.5 by 8.25. I used the corner rounder on 2 corners on the right-hand side on one piece and the 2 corners on the left-hand side of the second piece. Now these are going to be the covers that go over the actual album itself. So these are going to go on here. They're going to attach to the spine. So this is going to strengthen the spine as it's attached to this piece. So I'm going to attach these while we're waiting for that decorative paper on the spine to dry. I'm going to add my adhesive to this entire 2-inch section. And then I'm going to use my grid on my mat to make sure that this is straight. I'm going to make sure that it's lined up with the score line. Not past the score line at all, because this piece does need to fold over. And then I want to make sure that it is straight across. You can also check from the back side to make sure that this is straight, and then burnish this down. We're going to repeat that same process on the other side, adding the adhesive to the 2-inch section first. Going to use my grid, lining everything up, and then I'm going to place my piece down right next to the score line. Lining everything up, checking to make sure that it's straight on the back side, and then burnishing this down. It's time to add the hinge to the album cover. So this is the outside of my album cover. And I have taken some of my masking tape. You can also use painter's tape or washi, something that's just going to be easy to peel off. I've scrunched all of these together so that they are flush. Be careful that you don't scrunch them too much, but you want to press them together and then tape them so that they don't move. It'll make it easier when you're lining things up. So I just have one piece across the top and the bottom. I'm going to flip this over. Now I'm going to bring my page in, and I'm going to set this down here. So you will see when you set yours down, this will be just slightly larger than those lines are. So this is where you are going to be gluing your pages. Nothing's going to get glued to that center section. Only these parts will be glued down. But you're going to use that line as a way to measure where you're going to place this. So when I have my adhesive on, this is going to be just slightly past that first line on the spine. And whenever it's in the right position, you'll have a very small border around your paper. Same thing with this side. when it's in the right place, there's going to be that small border around the pages. Now, when you lay your paper here like this, if you don't have that small uniform border on the sides, take your paper to the paper trimmer, cut a very tiny bit off, re-round your corners so that this will work. So I'm going to take my adhesive and I'm going to apply it to one entire side of my paper. It doesn't matter which one you do first, but you want to place this just past the score line and all over the entire piece. Now that I have my adhesive on, I'm going to just line this side up. I'm going to set this down using my spine as a guide for where these two pieces should lay. Then I'm going to make sure it's uniform on the sides, top and bottom, and burnish this down. Then I'm going to lift up this side, add my adhesive to this entire paper, making sure not to go into that. Okay, so we just had a power failure. Sorry about the lights going out. You're gonna hear my printer turn on. We're going to be adding our adhesive to this entire section. Don't go into the spine, so don't go past that score line, making sure to cover the entire page. So now both of my pages are in my book. I'm going to go ahead and remove my tape very carefully, making sure not to tear any of this. And then I'm going to flip over and bring this up into the shape of a book. So now you'll be able to see down in that spine, the spine is curved where you see the flexible hinge. You can actually very lightly see that paper. That's why we covered it. So you can see that paper just a little bit through there. So now the book is ready to put our pages in. If you are using chipboard instead of the wooden cover for your Magic Forest album, you are going to need 2 pieces of heavyweight chipboard cut to 5.5 by 8.5. And then you're going to need 1 piece that measures 2 3/4 by 8.5 inches. We're going to need pieces of cardstock. I have 2 cut now. We'll cut 2 more later. These are 2 inches by 8.5 inches. To curve the spine piece, first you're going to just slowly start to bend this with your thumbs. Now I've already done this on my piece, so it's going to bend a little bit easier, but just go ahead and take your time and start bending so that the fibers in this chipboard start to break down. Once you have it started, take something round, tacky glue bottle is perfect size, and just start pushing the chipboard up against the glue and rolling so that you start to get a curved shape to your piece. Now you can curve this as much or as little as you choose, but I have the dimension of my spine piece 1/4 of an inch larger than what I actually want my spine to be. So I'm going to curve this until this piece is the right size. Once I have a curve like I want, I'm going to put it on my glass mat and see how large it is. So this is about 2 5/8. So I need to curve a little bit more. I want my spine to be 2.5 inches when it's curved from here to here. So this is about 2.5 inches. So this is how curved my spine's going to be. If you don't like the look of that, you want a milder curve, you just need to trim this off. So you could also do 2 5/8 instead of 2 3/4, and that would work too. Now that we have our spine piece curved, we're going to start with one of our covers and one of the pieces of cardstock. Now I drew a vertical line in the center just as a placement guide to make this easier. So I'm going to first take my adhesive, it does not matter which side you start with, and I'm going to place adhesive on 1/2 of this cardstock piece. Then I'm going to set my first cover right against that line, lining up the bottom and top edges so that it is straight. And then I'm going to burnish. Next, I need to leave a gap between this chipboard piece and where I'm going to place my spine. So I know that my chipboard is 1/16 of an inch. So if I have 2 of these, it's going to be 1/8. So what you can do is put 2 pieces together like this and draw a line, or you can measure out your chipboard, make sure that it's the right size, and then measure 2 times the thickness. So mine is 1/8. I'm going to mark 1/8 of an inch. And I'm going to draw another line. Then I'm going to take my spine piece and adhere that here. Now I want to make sure I don't go over this line. I want it to be on the left side of this line. It's okay if there's more room, but it will start cracking if there's less room. So you want to make sure that you don't go over the line. Placing adhesive on this tab, then you're going to adhere your spine piece. Next, I'm going to take the second piece of cardstock. I have my line in the middle. I'm going to do the same thing here, adding my adhesive to one side. And then I'm going to adhere my cover to my cardstock right against that line. Next, I'm going to mark my 1/8 of an inch. Add the adhesive to the section on the cardstock just up to that line. And now taking the other side of the spine, placing the spine piece to the right of that line and not going over that line. So now when we curve this, we have our piece wrapped. We're going to let this adhere before we actually do anything to it. I have 2 more pieces of cardstock that measure 2 inches by 8.5 inches. Alternatively, you can cut a large piece here that's about 5.5 inches and just place one. I'm going to be placing my strips here like this, just to cover my section of the spine where that gap is. So I'm just going to add my adhesive to this entire piece. So if you are using double-sided tape, you want to make sure that all of this is covered so that it is well adhered and doesn't lift up when the book is together and decorated. I'm actually going to press it between those pieces on the cover so that those two pieces of cardstock adhere to each other. Then I'm going to repeat that with the second piece of cardstock so I can cover the other side of my spine. Again, once this is on, I'm going to run my bone folder between the creases of the cover just to make sure that those two pieces of cardstock are adhered together in that gap. So now I have my cover together. I'm just going to let it dry like this before I bend it into a book shape. So now that my cover is dry, I'm just going to bend up on each of these covers. Then I'm going to take this and press the spine out to curve it. You can use your fingers to shape this however you want. And then getting this to curve to be about 2.5 inches, you just need to work it a little bit. And now we have our book shape. I'm going to uncurve this a little bit so you can see the next step. This is the hinge piece that we made for the mini album. This hinge is going to fit right in the center here. Now, obviously, it is larger than that piece by 1/4 inch because remember, it's going to curve in. So whenever we put this in our book together, it's going to be like this, where you're going to have that floating spine. So before we go any further, you will need to cut a piece of decorative paper to cover the entire spine piece. So because this is 2 3/4 inch, you want it to be just slightly smaller. You don't want it going into these folds at all. And you want it to be the entire length of this piece, so 8.5 inches by just under 2 3/4 inch. You are going to adhere that piece all the way down here, making sure it's nice and adhered first. Then what you're going to do is place your adhesive on this entire page, lining this up just on this side of that gap, so it's not in the gap, and centered on the page so that there is about 1/8 inch around. That's where you're going to adhere that part. Once that's dry, you're going to add your adhesive to this paper. You're going to curve your spine. You can also, with this one attached, move this direction until you get this piece. Obviously, you won't be able to fold this, but until you get this piece to be lined up here with this gap, but not in that gap. So it'll just take a little bit of time. You'll have to play with it. It'll be really hard to see on camera. I'm not actually doing it on camera because I'm using my cover, but it's going to be like this when it's finished with that little gap. And then you will have your pages in your book. Now, obviously, that piece of the cover will be curved, so the book is not going to lay completely flat whenever you're looking through it. You will also want to round the corners on your cover so that it does match the cover here. It doesn't matter which cover you're using, putting the pages in the book will be the same process. So I'm going to start with my first page. I'm going to open this up. We're going to be adhering the hinge to here So we're gonna move these 3 out of the way. We're going to focus on the first hinge. It is going to go like this on the page. The easiest way to do this is to place your adhesive on your hinge section. So I'm going to add my adhesive, but not go over that score line. You don't want any in that center gusset section between those 2 hinges, but you want the rest of the hinge to be covered. Make sure you have your page in the correct orientation, opening up, placing this direction, right next to that score line, and lining everything up so that it is straight and pressing down. Then you can fold over, make sure that it is lined up where you need it to be, and then press down really well to adhere this to that tab into the book. Now that we have the page in the book, we need to seal up the bottom before we adhere this to here. So I'm going to be placing my adhesive pretty quickly across the bottom and just slightly up into this little curve, and then all along this tab. And then I'm going to close this, and it's going to line up perfectly where it should on the page. You want to clamp the bottom of the page closed and then press this together. Then I'm going to press it over just to get a good adherence. And now we have our first page in our book. I'm going to use a roll of tape just to leave that page up in the air, because remember, this spine is not down. So if I leave it flat, it's going to pop that up and make it just a little bit harder for me to place my pages. So I'm going to take my next page, same thing, I'm going to open it up. I'm going to flatten this out a little bit, place my adhesive on my tab. Then I'm going to take it this direction, being very careful not to go past the score line when I put this page on. Because the way the spine is, you just have to be really careful and patient as you place your pages. So I'm going to keep pressing this until it's on and starts to dry, and then I'll move on to the next step of closing the page. Just like with the first page, I'm going to place my adhesive down at the bottom to seal that pocket closed. And then I'm going to place my adhesive on the tab on the actual pocket page itself. And then close the page. And squeeze the bottom together to shut that part into the pocket. And now we have 2 pages in our album. I'm going to need to add something just to give it a little bit of weight so that the cover doesn't come up. Then I'm going to add my third page in the same manner. Then we have the final page and we will secure this the same way. And now that we have all 4 of our pages in the album, you can see that that spine will curve, but it is that floating spine piece. And when the album is closed, it opens, those pages will flip, and the spine does come up just because of the way it's made. But our pages are now in our album.